Hi again everyone, Bear from Bear Reads Books. Welcome back to my channel. Time for another book review. And today I was going to do a quick book review on a book I finished recently called On a Barbarous Coast by Craig. It was dual written by Craig Cormick and Harold Ludwick. I'll put a little picture up here. On a Barbarous Coast is a historical retelling of the first explorers coming and discovering, in inverted commas, discovering Australia. So the first Europeans to come and claim Australia as British territory, I guess. So really it tells the story of Captain James Cook, and in his boat, as he was sailing through the South Pacific, he visited New Zealand, he visited Tahiti, and so in all of those countries there are monuments to this person. And when I first saw this on the shelves and read what it was about, I thought, what a strange time to bring out a book like this. Not only have we had a lot of historical talk about who James Cook was, good and bad, and his place in Australian history and his place in New Zealand and South Pacific history in general, but we've also had a lot of discussion about the removal of Confederate statues and the removal of racist statues, and we've had those same discussions in Australia about Captain James Cook. In fact, his main statue in Sydney, right near the Sydney Opera House, had been defaced a few times in recent times throughout this period. So when I first read the back of the book and dug a little bit about what the story was about, it really felt like a strange time to be releasing something like this. The bios on the same, I think I mentioned this previously, but having dual authors kind of put me a little bit at ease too, because every time I'd read something by two authors, it felt like two authors. And this does too, but for a better and a different reason. Craig Cormick is just a regular old author. He's written books before, and then he is the, I guess, European writer, and Harold Ludwick is an Indigenous man. And the book is from two perspectives. So one is from one of the sailors from the ship who's shipwrecked on the northern coast of Australia, and the other narrator of the book is the voice of the Indigenous people that first come into contact with these European explorers. And I think it does a good job of balancing those two things. So you see all of the, not horrible things that the white people do, but all the bumbling, foolish things that the white people do when they first get here. And then you see the reaction by the Indigenous population, watching them just do these ridiculous things, like never reaching out to the Indigenous population to ask for help, not knowing how to catch a fish, not knowing how to find food, almost starving to death, all because they refused to believe that the Indigenous population knew anything about helping or were in any way competent to be able to help them. And it really was. And a lot of these early expeditions to Australia, in truth, were complete bumbling failures. The sheer fact that they survived was a marvel in itself, really, because they were so racist and so up there, so self-absorbed with their one goal of finding and declaring a territory for the United Kingdom or for England, that everything else went out the window. Civility is one. Politeness, civility, everything else went out the window. So let's start with what the story of James Cook actually was. After going through Tahiti in New Zealand, he finds this great southern land, then not called Australia, but he claims it. But he never landed in North Queensland. He lands in North Queensland to repair his boat, and he stays there for about 5 weeks, and then travels further south and finds Botany Bay in Sydney, so the big Sydney harbour basically, and he thinks that is the perfect spot for a settlement. And then he goes home and tells everyone, and then white people flood in, and you know the rest. This story stops that story at North Queensland, right at the tip of Australia, in the northern tip of Australia, where they instead of fixing their boat, repairing their boat for a period of 6 weeks, they run aground on a reef. The Endeavour is scuttled and disappears under the water, and about 20 men make it ashore and survive. It then turns into this Lord of the Flies farce, where the men split up into 2 or 3 camps because of variously ridiculous disagreements. Some of them choosing to ingratiate themselves with the indigenous population. Some choosing to shoot at them at every opportunity, and others just completely fail at finding food, making shelter, and just keeping each other sane. So it really does descend into this Lord of the Flies type farce. But the narrator is a man called Magra, who was a ship's mate on the Endeavour, and he is now the highest ranking officer, but no one really agrees that he should be in charge, because a week before the captain had removed him from that rank, so there is no ranking officer. So it's all just a mess. The Captain Cook himself is in a coma and is not expected to survive. And then the other high-ranking people aren't actually officers of the Navy. They are gentlemen like botanists and artists and astronomers. So then they're given pretty much no authority to make decisions whatsoever, as much as they would like it to be. And then interspersed between these crazy things happening to these white people stumbling around is the Indigenous story of them being sighted and what they think of these spirits coming to the land and not being able to find food. And the Indigenous population thought them to be returning ancestors, hence the white spirit-like appearance. They thought them to be returning ancestors, and they were quite perplexed as to why returning ancestors wouldn't remember how to catch food and wouldn't remember how to speak their language. So the indigenous population are very keen to engage with them and to help them and to help them to relearn all of the customs that they must have forgotten. But the white population, the sailors, are completely resistant to that and shoot at them and drive them away at every opportunity. And the one thing I wished, and in the end I gave this 3 stars, and the one thing I wish those Indigenous sections had have been much more. They were very brief, sometimes a page and a half, sometimes a half a dozen pages or so. But they just felt very brief. After a very long section of watching white people kill each other, then you've got a very short section of from the Indigenous perspective of how they felt about all this. And I would have liked to have seen a lot more than that. I don't think it was done insensitively. I think it's a very sensitive historical retelling or historical reimagining. I think it's done incredibly sensitively. And for that they should be commended. I don't think there's any problem with this book. Culturally I don't have any problems with this book, but I could have had more engagement with the Aboriginal population, because I never really felt I knew the reason why we needed this story. I mean, there's been an awful lot written about Cook, good or bad. There's been an awful lot of reimagining and retellings of Cook's journeys, good or bad. So this is just another thing to add to the pile, and I was never sure, why would you do this? Is this doing something different to anyone else? I mean, it would have been the same story had it been any boat arriving in this location for the first time. It would have been the same story. The fact that it's Cook and it's a historical retelling of that first settlement really makes no difference whatsoever. And in the end, not to give anything away, but the warning from Magra, the main narrator of the book, the warning is very clear that in the end we've made inroads to friendship with you, but don't expect other white people to do the same. Expect the opposite, that white people will come, and they will come in their droves, and they will destroy everything you hold dear. And the message at the end is very, very clear. There's a very clear warning sign. And so I don't think there's a solution there. I mean, it's not positing a better solution. It's not positing a different version of history, because in the end, I think I think the book is saying that it's inevitable that even with this change of history and this small group of people choosing to do things differently and in a more culturally appropriate and a more humane way, the end result is still the same, that white people in their hordes will come and they will destroy everything. And that's quite a sad ending, I agree, but the book is never really, you never really get the impression that the book is going to end well. It's not a happy ending book. I would have also liked to have seen more of the history, more of the future. I would have liked to have seen more of what the future brought, because it obviously delays the start of settlement, and what that meant, whether it happens before or after these men die, we're not quite sure what history will bring. Only the warning from Magra that it will bring death and destruction to Indigenous populations. But I would have liked to have seen maybe even a 50 or a 100-year leap forward, or even a 200-year leap forward, to see what our history would bring us based on this small, different beginning. And it doesn't do that. It stops short of that. And that would have been a very difficult thing to tackle, I think. But in all, the book is done really sensitively. And again, it's an entertaining read without being spectacularly important to the conversation about cultural appropriation, or about colonisation, or about how poorly white people treated Indigenous populations. All of that. Now, I don't think it adds or detracts anything from the conversation about Cook. It's just another story. So in that way, it was a little disappointing. But the story itself, still entertaining. I gave it 3 stars. Another 3-star read for the year. There's been quite a few this year. So that is On a Barbarous Coast and I'll read those authors' names out again. On a Barbarous Coast by Craig Cormick and Harold Ludwick. If you do like your adventure explorer type stories, want to know a little bit more about the early Australian European settlement, it's not a bad literary place to start, I guess. Enjoy your day, everyone, wherever you may be, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.